Hey guys, Alex here. I want to talk about a few things before I get started. First is that New Orleans sanitation workers are currently trying to organize. There have been some terminations of employment because employees are trying to advocate for better conditions. They want PPE, that's personal protective equipment. They want a $15 minimum wage in their industry. They want $150 a week of hazard pay as they are working collecting people's garbage during the pandemic. And they want repairs done to their trucks, which apparently are leaking dangerous chemicals onto the workers. So if you're interested in supporting them, please go to, you can find some information. If you're on Instagram or whatever, check out the WWI page for New Orleans. If you go on Instagram, new_Orleans_WWI, on their thing there, you have a link right now to their GoFundMe and to their petition, and you can also find information that you can use to email. So that's if you feel like you should be supporting the cause of workers, I think that would be a good place to start. Additionally, I see Rose Cangalosi and her band Fantasy Nonfiction have just dropped a new album. I haven't heard the whole thing, but I did hear the single a while ago, and it's probably pretty good. And I think it's out on all kinds of streaming platforms. So check it out. If you can throw them money, I'm sure they would be appreciative of it. Because as someone who's made an album or four, I know it's a very expensive and thankless process. And that kind of segues into what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to talk about the music industry and my experiences in it and how it relates to things like capitalism. So I want to start off with like a little bit of background on myself. If any of you don't know, I've been a professional musician for over a decade. I have an undergraduate degree in music education. Additionally, I have some graduate level credits in jazz studies. But my experience was basically this. I spent the majority of my career, and I want to make a separation between these two things as what I would call a laboring musician. And I make the difference between a laboring musician and an entrepreneurial musician in that I would view an entrepreneurial musician as someone who creates their own business around their music. So if you're an original artist and you have a band and that band is your company, I would classify you more as an entrepreneurial musician. Whereas if you're a working musician, you might work for someone who is an entrepreneurial musician, but you might work in many other contexts, which is, for me, I worked in a lot of working bands. I worked for artists or entrepreneurial musicians. I worked on corporate jobs like cruise ships. I've done musical theater. I've done like this whole spectrum of work, and I've scored film. And the thing I learned about it is there's a pretty low glass ceiling as far as being a laboring musician. Even though there is some room for entrepreneurship within that, you could be running your own event company or wedding band, and if there's a market for that, you can be successful. The glass ceiling, as far as comparing to what is available in the industry and as businesses are concerned as a whole, is pretty low, because you can't really brand and merchandise a wedding band as much. You pretty much unless you do something like there are companies out there like Hangland or Silver Arrow that will sell their name, and they have a list of people they call that maybe is a few hundred people, and they book all these different events, and every event they play at, they are that band, but it's different people each time, which I guess is one way to kind of leverage that. But what I found is, as working as a kind of a sideman, a working musician, is I hit a lot of glass ceilings. you hit a lot of walls. Like a common wall I would hit would be I would get a gig in like a kind of popular band that would make, you know, okay money, and but the problem was, you know, maybe they wouldn't play that often, like to the consistency where I could make a living solely off of that band. So maybe, you know, maybe I get a gig with them maybe twice a week or something, and the money is okay, but I need to also supplement by playing in other bands and playing other gigs. And then sometimes you have conflicts of interest in your time, and then you're put in that hard position of like, you know, like, do I want to endanger the gig that pays me more but doesn't pay me enough for the sake of you know, these smaller gigs? And then you wind up in a weird like negotiating kind of position with people that doesn't always work well. I've definitely been in positions where I was, you know, being lied to and taken advantage of, as far as, you know, people who would, you know, promise me, you know, that I was part of an ensemble or whatever, or part of the branding, and you know, that I was the work I was putting in was contributing to an overall foundation of a future. And then, you know, I'd be doing all these gigs, you know, I'd be playing Saturday nights and maybe only making $50, and the idea was that we were all investing in something together. And then come to find out that, you know, the leader of the ensemble was taking way more money and paying everyone way less. And, you know, you come to find out a couple months later, after they cut you loose, that, you know, the leader of that band has just bought a club. So I've been through all kinds of situations and experiences, some positive, some negative. You know, there's a lot of things to be upset about, and that can be heartbreaking and whatever. But I did get to a point where I decided that the place where I could grow, because between all these brick walls, it's like, even when you have, sorry, I wanted to explain this further. Even when you have good gigs, most of them are still only temporary. So you can have a good gig for a while that pays pretty well, but eventually that gig will probably dry up, and it's kind of an ebb and flow. But between like the good parts and the bad parts of working, you kind of bottom out around this like medium that's not a very you know, reliable or great income. But that was like most of my job for a long time. So I decided if I was going to get to the next level, I would have to, and I didn't really think about it in these terms at the time, but I would have to start my own business, my own band, my own music business. Now, when you think about starting a band, as someone who's came up through the music industry, and this was before I did a lot of studying on business practices and you know, how businesses work, and what the success and failure rate is on businesses and all of that. And I'm going to get into that later, even though I kind of covered that a little bit in my last video. You know, you kind of go into it thinking like, I kind of went in with the naivete of like the things I was always told growing up, you know, like if you sacrifice and work hard and invest what you can and take some risks, like you could be successful. So I kind of went in believing that. So, you know, pretty much all the money, I ran my band at a deficit for a pretty long time, because you have to pay for, you know, recording, you have to pay for your sidemen, you have to pay for artwork and marketing, you have to pay for transport, and I was doing a little bit of touring. And you know, like that all adds up. And especially if you were coming from someone like me, who at the same time as running my own business, I was working still as kind of a working musician, and that was how I was being my own patron. So really what I came to find out and learn was that the numbers to make a band or any business successful, really, you know, it would require being able to put down investments of up to like $50,000 to $150,000. Now, the thing about that is, you could compare that to any other business, and that's maybe about average for anything true if you're trying to open a brick and mortar store, and you kind of have to look at a band that way. But the thing about a band is your return rate is going to be way lower. So if you can't necessarily absorb that kind of impact financially, you're going to be in some trouble, because you can't sell really music as a product, you know. between all the streaming that's expected. So you pretty much have to run your band as a brand company that sells other things. So that includes, if you can make a board game, if you can make a coloring book, t-shirts, hats, sunglasses, lighters, anything but music that you can physically sell. The problem with that is the music basically becomes the marketing aspect of your company that sells these other things. And it's kind of inconsequential as far as a business perspective is concerned, because you can't necessarily make money off of the music that you're making and putting out there, because there's very low returns on revenues. And like, you could maybe sell CDs, but it's kind of a dead medium. You could risk selling vinyl, but it's vinyl is pretty expensive to print up, and you are limited based on, are the people who listen to the type of music you make the kind of people who collect and buy vinyl, which, if maybe you're some kind of, if you're playing music that, if you're like a Bonamassa or someone who's playing music for a boomer crowd, there might be still an audience that will buy CDs or buy vinyl. Or if there's like, if you happen to be appealing to more of like a hipster kind of crowd that's into this like new retro thing, you could maybe risk vinyl. But the thing is, to even make that risk and that investment, you need to be reaching a large amount of people, and ideally those people need to be geographically close together. And that was a big thing I found. That was a big problem, because I found some success with like my videos that I put out. I would reach maybe a couple 100,000 people with a video that I would pay to produce, but it doesn't necessarily do me any good, because views and likes cannot necessarily be monetized. And if your audience is spread out in such a way where you have there's 20 people in Bangladesh, and then 4 people in California, and then 60 people spread out around the state of Missouri, or whatever, or however geographically it is, it doesn't really benefit you as far as touring and selling stuff. Because if I can't necessarily make a profit to drive a band of 4 people from Louisiana up to Chicago, so the 3 people that like my band there will come and hopefully spend enough money that that I will be able to sell, that I will be able to come out in the green. And that's the real problem with it, is you need to have, I believe that there's an audience for everything, right? Unless you're really bad, but if you have a band and conceivably that like you've played for 100 people, and let's say 10 of those people really like you, you could factor that up to where if you were playing in front of 1 million people, if 1 million people had been exposed to your music, there would be a big enough percent of people that would support you as an artist. But how can you, as an indie artist who maybe makes $16,000 to $20,000 a year, living on basically nothing and putting everything you make back into your own original project, how are you supposed to reach the amount of people that is necessary at a minimum to be successful and get that return? And that was really the problem. And the thing is, there used to be a bit of an infrastructure to make that more viable, and that was when there were more record labels, or maybe you could find an investor or something. But because the returns on actual music are so low and so hard, there's the actual recorded music. If I'm a record label, I don't, it's a 360 deal you want to get, because you're only going to make your returns, and this, if you're getting the majority or a piece of all that merchandise and all that other stuff. And if I'm the artist, if I'm the one responsible for that, then I'm at odds, because that's a big chunk of where I could potentially make my money from. And if I'm responsible not only for myself, but I have to pay employees, I have to pay, at the very least, if I have to pay a band, if I have to pay roadies, if I have any kind of tech, depending on what my show consists of. Really, like, the only way I've seen it pulled off possible is if you can minimize everything so much where you can be like a totally self-contained solo act. And there's challenges in that too, because if you're just on your own playing an instrument, it's not necessarily, they don't necessarily want to put you in big rooms or like party rooms or party crowds, and it's hard to like get exposed to different stuff, and then it's you kind of are like also locked in genre, like by genre a little bit, because unless you happen to play a kind of music or something that lends itself to that, or you can wind up doing this thing that I see a lot of guys have done, where they just wind up going out and playing with backing tracks. And maybe it's the fact that I have more of an artist's head than a business head, but I fucking hate that shit. I went to see a guitar player. I won't say his name because I'm about to talk shit, but he was relatively famous, kind of shred guy. And yeah, he set up, and it was basically watching a guy practice along with his laptop, and I was like, why would I come see you do this? I could watch this on Instagram for 60 seconds and be just as satisfied. There's no substance to this. This is not entertaining. This isn't fun. This isn't cool. There's nothing I like about it. Anyway, but that's neither here nor there. So really, here's the problem about what I see is like the relationship between capitalism and art is that it's made it to the point where, as far as being a commercial musician, unless you have another source of income that you can channel in to build your project to the point of being successful, and I'm not talking about like the 0.00% that get a lucky break, I'm talking about like the vast majority of artists out there who are trying to build a business and have to build a business because they can't count on, the one day that they happen to have a video that goes super viral, or I'm not talking about like the Gautiers of the world. And still, that was like, I'm sure there was some money and some work put into the production of somebody I used to know and all that shit. I'm sure that wasn't free. I don't think it was. Anyway, I'm getting off subject. But unless you have this money to put into your music project to help it be sustainable, and look at it as the aspect of a business and the price it takes a business to grow and be successful, you can't necessarily find a level of sustaining success. And the thing is, if you do have that income and you do have that money, and you're way better off doing something like putting it in high dividend yielding stock and letting it compound, or buying investment property. There's so many more ways to leverage your money that would be more effective and have a better rate of return than putting it into a business specifically based around music, that it kind of doesn't make sense, unless like you're super rich and like you just shit money, like you have a trust fund or something like that, or you have a label that doesn't care or anything like that. There are outliers out there, but yeah, that's basically what I'm getting at. So anyway, thank you for listening to me today. If you have any stories about your artistry or your work in the music business, or you have any commentary on what I've said, please write it down below, and feel free to subscribe. Thank you for watching.